Welcome everyone to History and War. The year was AD 177. The barbarian storm once again swept upon Rome's frontier. The fragile calm along the Danube shattered as the Marcomanni, Quadi, and their allies surged once more across the border. What had seemed like peace revealed itself to be only an interlude, a pause before the next assault. For the weary empire, there would be no rest. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, was compelled yet again to trade the scroll for the sword. Thus began the Second Marcomannic War, a struggle that would test the strength of Rome and the resolve of its emperor like never before. The peace of AD 175 proved anything but tranquil. North of the Danube, Roman garrisons pressed heavily upon the Marcomanni and the Quadi. They were forbidden to cultivate their own land, denied the right to graze their cattle, and even barred from seeking new homes in calmer regions. It was no accident. This was Rome's strategy, to grind down the tribes, to break their spirit, and to bend them into the mold of Roman rule. But oppression breeds defiance. The Marcomanni and the Quadi, weary of humiliation and hardship, rose in fury. What began as unrest soon flared into full-scale rebellion. By AD 177, the frontier once again burned, and the barbarian storm fell upon Rome with unrelenting force. By the beginning of AD 178, Marcus Aurelius reached a reluctant conclusion. Once again, his presence was required at the troubled Danube frontier. The revolt of Avidius Cassius had robbed him of a decisive victory in Germany, and he had hoped the generals he left behind, the Quintilii brothers, would only need to conduct minor operations to maintain order. But peace proved fleeting. The Marcomanni and Quadi used the 2 years of calm to prepare for renewed conflict. This time, they avoided large open battles and instead turned to guerrilla tactics, striking suddenly, retreating swiftly, and wearing down the Roman defenses. In response, the Roman legions crossed the Danube, advancing deep into enemy territory and fortifying strongholds within the so-called demilitarized zone. Yet despite what the historian Cassius Dio described as the shrewdness, courage, and experience of the Quintilii, the war dragged on. The rebellion could not be crushed without the emperor himself once more taking command. Moreover, new tribes, previously absent from the conflicts of AD 167 to 175, now emerged as Rome's adversaries, most notably the Hermunduri. Additional evidence of the strain imposed on the empire by the turbulent northern frontier can be seen in Marcus Aurelius's economic measures. During this period, the emperor oversaw the continued devaluation of the currency, and the traditional honorific titles Germanicus and Sarmaticus disappeared from coinage issued in AD 177. These changes make it clear that Marcus Aurelius was deeply troubled by the unfolding situation along the Danube. On the 3rd of August, AD 178, Marcus Aurelius, accompanied by his son Commodus, departed Rome for the northern frontier on what was officially designated the secunda expeditio Germanica, the Second Germanic Campaign. Perhaps aware that he might never return to the Eternal City, Marcus undertook a series of symbolic acts rooted in ancient Roman tradition. He urged the Senate to provide funds for the campaign and performed careful ceremonial preparations, including the ritual casting of the sacred spear kept in the Temple of Bellona into the ground, a symbolic act conducted on territory regarded as hostile. These gestures underscored both the seriousness of the conflict and the emperor's role as a religious as well as military leader. Marcus Aurelius brought with him to the Danube most of his key advisors, including Claudius Pompeianus, Vitrasius Pollio, and Bruttius Praesens. Another notable consular in the party was Unius Maximus. With Pertinax and Valerius Maximianus already active on the frontier, and the dependable Aufidius Victorinus serving as proconsul in Asia, Marcus could rely on a seasoned and capable team to manage the campaign ahead. But what exactly was Marcus' objective? Remarkably, it appears that he intended to transform the territories of the Quadi and Marcomanni into a new permanent Roman province, his own version of Trajan's Dacia. Some sources also suggest that he considered establishing a second province in part of Sarmatian territory. It is important to emphasize his intentions carefully. Whereas annexation had not been part of his strategy during the First Marcomannic War of AD 167 to 175, this time Marcus viewed it as the most effective long-term solution. His plan was not driven by greed for land. Rather, it was conceived with purely military and administrative aims. By incorporating these border regions into the empire, Marcus sought to eliminate any tribes that could pose a future threat to Rome. Upon his arrival at the Danube, Marcus Aurelius' first step was to negotiate lasting peace with the Iazyges. Demonstrating both diplomacy and strategic foresight, he secured an alliance that kept them out of the conflict. The Iazyges were granted unprecedented terms: Roman citizenship, tax immunity, a one-time tribute, and the promise of annual subsidies. They received free access to Roman markets and were permitted to cross through Dacia to maintain contact with the Roxolani. Yet restrictions remained. They could not sail the river in their own ships, nor occupy its islands. Trade was allowed only through Roman vessels at garrisoned towns. Marcus assured them that his campaign was aimed solely at the Quadi, the Marcomanni, and their allies. In return, the Iazyges pledged support to Rome, even proposing nothing less than the extermination of the Germanic tribes. Marcus informed the Iazyges that his first target would be the Cotini, located on their flank, but reassured them that his aim was merely to displace this troublesome tribe, now allied with the Quadi and Marcomanni. Confident that the Iazyges had been neutralized, Marcus launched a swift campaign against the Cotini. Their military strength was quickly broken, and the surviving members were relocated to Lower Pannonia. To further weaken Rome's adversaries, Marcus also permitted the most prominent groups of the Neuristae, along with their families, to cross the Danube and settle within the empire. Alarmed that their supposed allies were being displaced, the Quadi broke away from the Marcomanni and attempted a large-scale migration north to join their kinsmen, the Semnones, on the Middle Elbe. Marcus, however, was determined that his envisioned province of Marcomannia should not become a depopulated wasteland. He ordered Roman forces to prevent this migration. By this time, the territory of the Quadi was firmly under Roman control, with some 40,000 legionaries stationed in permanent stone forts, supported by a network of blockhouses and watchtowers that effectively monitored and controlled every part of the plains. The Quadi found themselves in a desperate situation, unable either to leave their territory or to overcome the Romans. At this critical moment, they were offered potential relief. For reasons that remain unclear, though possibly because Marcus Aurelius did not see fit to extend to their Sarmatian kin, the Roxolani, the same generous terms granted to the Iazyges, the Roxolani sent an army to support the beleaguered Germans. Reinforced by this aid, the Quadi and Marcomanni finally emerged from their guerrilla hideouts to confront the Romans in open battle. The outcome was catastrophic for the Germans. In a day-long engagement commanded by Tarutinius Paternus, their forces were decisively defeated, suffering enormous casualties, with some 40,000 captured. Numismatic evidence allows this decisive battle to be confidently dated to April AD 179. This victory earned Marcus Aurelius his 10th and final triumph as imperator, while Commodus, still in his teens, recorded his 3rd. The Roxolani, disheartened by the defeat of their forces and perhaps influenced by the generous terms granted to their kin, the Iazyges, withdrew from the coalition. The Quadi and Marcomanni were once again forced into guerrilla warfare. Determined to secure his envisioned province of Marcomannia, Marcus stationed 45,000 troops permanently across their territory. These forces were equipped with extensive facilities, including hot baths, and pursued a systematic scorched earth policy. According to Cassius Dio, the Romans would not allow them to pasture their flocks, till the soil or do anything else in security, but kept receiving deserters from the enemy's ranks and captives from their own. The contrast with the early years of the First Marcomannic War was striking. Whereas previously deserters and prisoners had tended to flow from Rome's ranks to the enemy, now the situation was entirely reversed. The War of Attrition had become even more severe, and the brutality inflicted on the guerrillas surpassed that of AD 171 to 175. During the winter of AD 179 to 180, The Roman army was stationed in high spirits at Trenčín, on the river Wag, roughly 100 miles beyond the Danube in southern Slovakia, with a widespread expectation that the final campaign to subdue the enemy would be concluded the following spring. The First Marcomannic War had been interrupted by Avidius Cassius's revolt, and the second met a similar fate, this time due to the emperor's death. In early March AD 180, Marcus Aurelius fell seriously ill from the Antonine plague, likely smallpox, a disease he and Galen had studied since AD 166. Recognizing the urgency, he summoned Commodus and stressed that the German campaign must be brought to a successful conclusion. Pressing his son to fulfill his final wishes, Marcus warned that failure would betray the interests of the Roman state. Commodus, citing his own health and the contagious nature of the disease, promised to comply, but insisted on a brief delay. He later justified his caution by reasoning that even the healthy could achieve only gradually, while a dead man can achieve nothing. Marcus Aurelius then hastened the inevitable by abstaining from food and drink. On the 6th day of self-imposed fasting, he summoned his friends and close advisors. When the troops learned that their emperor was dying, they were overcome with grief. Though he had begun his reign as a philosopher often regarded with suspicion, more than a decade of warfare had earned him the respect and deep affection of his soldiers. On the 7th day, Marcus summoned Commodus briefly, but sent him away to protect him from infection. He then covered his head, lay down, and passed away in sleep. His last recorded words were a recommendation of Commodus to the army. When a tribune asked for the day's watchword, he replied, "Go to the rising sun, for I am already setting." Almost immediately after his father's death, Commodus announced his intention to conclude the war in Germany and abandon Marcus Aurelius's plans for annexation. The resulting peace imposed strict conditions on the Marcomanni, Quadi, and their allies. They were prohibited from deploying armed forces near the Danube, required to pay grain tributes, and obliged to provide Rome with military contingents. Additionally, they could not wage war against neighboring peoples without Roman approval, and all tribal councils had to be held in the presence of Roman officers. In exchange, the Roman legions withdrew to the frontier established in AD 167, and the plans to create the provinces of Marcomannia and Sarmatia were permanently abandoned. While the Roman populace welcomed the peace enthusiastically, the emperor's advisors held more divided opinions. Following the death of Marcus Aurelius, Roman operations beyond the Danube continued, though now primarily directed against the Sarmatians under the supervision of local governors and military commanders. Roman forces campaigned against the Iazyges, the Buri, and the so-called Free Dacians, inhabiting the region between the Danube and Roman Dacia. The details of this phase are sparse, but known commanders included Marcus Valerius Maximianus, Pescennius Niger, and Clodius Albinus. The CL3 5937 inscription even refers to a campaign against the Lugi or Buri, known as the Expeditio Burica. These victories proved sufficient for Commodus to adopt the title Germanicus Maximus by AD 182. Yet, though the Germanic and Sarmatian tribes were temporarily subdued, the Marcomannic Wars offered a grim prelude to the large-scale invasions of the 4th and 5th centuries, foreshadowing the eventual fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire.